Chapter 1. A Quiet Beginning in Phoenix. In the sweltering summer of 2017, Phoenix, Arizona, hummed with its usual relentless heat. But for Lauren, a 29-year-old emergency room nurse, the world had narrowed to the sterile walls of a hospital delivery room. She had endured a grueling labor, lasting nearly 20 hours, marked by exhaustion and fleeting moments of fear. At last, her daughter, Clara, was born. A fragile, healthy girl with a faint cry that filled Lauren with both relief and an unfamiliar weight of responsibility. The birth marked Lauren's first step into motherhood, a role she had long anticipated, but now faced with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Her husband, Eric Montgomery, was by her side throughout the ordeal. A quiet man with a steady presence, he held her hand, offered water, and whispered reassurances during the long hours. His support was unwavering, yet there was a subtle distance in his demeanor, a deference that Lauren noticed but couldn't quite place. Eric, a junior accountant in a local firm, was the only child of Sylvia and Roger Montgomery, a wealthy couple who owned a sprawling network of dental clinics across the Southwest. The Montgomery name carried weight in Phoenix, synonymous with polished smiles and discreet influence. Sylvia and Roger presented themselves as gracious and generous, their public personas polished by years of calculated charm. Behind closed doors, however, they were meticulous and controlling, their warmth a carefully curated facade. After Clara's birth, Lauren and Eric returned to their modest two-bedroom home in a quiet Phoenix suburb. The first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments. Lauren, still recovering from the physical toll of childbirth, threw herself into caring for Clara, learning the rhythms of feeds and naps while grappling with her new identity as a mother. Eric helped when he could, though his long hours at work left Lauren to navigate much of the early chaos alone. She didn't mind at first. The solitude allowed her to bond with Clara, to study the curve of her daughter's tiny fingers and the soft weight of her in her arms. A month after Clara's birth, Sylvia began visiting daily. Her arrivals were unannounced, her sleek silver sedan pulling into the driveway with unnerving regularity. Sylvia was a tall woman in her late 50s, with sharp cheekbones and a wardrobe of tailored blouses that spoke of wealth and precision. She brought gifts, monogrammed baby clothes, a high-end stroller, a mobile adorned with crystal stars. But each offering came with a subtle expectation. She would linger in the nursery, adjusting Clara's blanket or rearranging the bottles in a way that felt like a silent critique of Lauren's efforts. Sylvia's suggestions were framed as kindness, a recommendation for a pediatrician she knew personally, a lactation consultant she insisted was the best in the city, even an offer to hire a private nanny to lighten Lauren's load. Lauren, polite but increasingly uneasy, declined the nanny, explaining she wanted to care for Clara herself. Sylvia's smile never wavered, but her eyes grew colder with each refusal. Roger, Sylvia's husband, appeared less frequently, but carried the same air of authority. A broad-shouldered man with a clipped way of speaking, he seemed to view Clara as an extension of the Montgomery legacy. During his visits, he spoke of family values and stability, his words heavy with implication. Lauren sensed an unspoken pressure, as if her role as Clara's mother was under scrutiny. Eric, meanwhile, remained silent during these interactions. He was a dutiful son, raised under the weight of his parents' expectations, and his loyalty to them seemed to overshadow his new role as a father. When Lauren raised concerns about Sylvia's overreach, Eric would nod vaguely, promising to talk to his mother, but no changes followed. As the weeks passed, Lauren began to feel her autonomy slipping away. Sylvia's presence was suffocating, her suggestions turning into directives. The pediatrician Lauren had chosen was replaced with Sylvia's contact, the appointment made without her input. Formula samples, which Lauren had decided against, appeared in the kitchen, accompanied by Sylvia's comment that breastfeeding was unreliable. Each small intrusion chipped away at Lauren's confidence, leaving her questioning her instincts. She felt like a guest in her own home, her decisions overridden by the Montgomery family's quiet insistence on control. One morning, as Lauren organized Clara's medical records in the nursery, she noticed something that stopped her cold. The folder, neatly labeled with Clara's name, contained a medical card that should have listed Lauren as the primary contact. Instead, the name printed in crisp black ink was S. Montgomery. The discovery sent a chill through her. It was not a clerical error, it was deliberate, a signal that Sylvia's influence had crossed an invisible line. Lauren stood frozen, the card trembling in her hand, as the weight of her situation settled in. Clara was her daughter, but the Montgomery family seemed determined to claim her, piece by piece. Chapter 2. Family Against Mother. In the weeks following Clara's birth in 2017, the quiet tension in Lauren's Phoenix home grew heavier, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Lauren, still navigating the fragile early days of motherhood, felt the Montgomery family's influence tightening around her life. Eric, her husband, remained a passive figure, his allegiance torn between his new family and the parents who had shaped him. One evening, as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, Eric approached Lauren with a proposal that caught her off guard. He suggested signing a power of attorney document, framing it as a practical measure to allow his parents, Sylvia and Roger, to assist with Clara's care without bureaucratic hurdles. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, but the request struck Lauren as an overstep, a subtle erosion of her authority as a mother. She refused, her voice firm despite the exhaustion that clung to her. Eric's face tightened, but he said nothing more, retreating into the silence that had become his default. A week later, the consequences of her refusal arrived with brutal clarity. A court summons appeared in the mail, its formal language chilling in its precision. Sylvia and Roger had filed a legal petition seeking temporary custody of Clara. The allegations were a calculated assault on Lauren's character. They claimed she was suffering from postpartum depression, rendering her unfit and unsafe to care for her daughter. They pointed to her temporary leave from her nursing job as evidence of financial instability, arguing that Clara required the security of a stable family with resources. The words felt like a betrayal, not just from Sylvia and Roger, but from Eric, who had not warned her of his parents' intentions. Lauren's shock gave way to a burning resolve. She would not let them take her daughter. The Montgomerys, with their wealth and connections, had spared no expense in their pursuit. They hired a prominent attorney, known for handling high-profile family disputes in Arizona, whose reputation alone cast a long shadow over the proceedings. To bolster their case, they produced a collection of documents that painted a damning picture of Lauren. Among them were medical reports, purportedly from a psychiatrist, diagnosing her with severe postpartum depression, reports Lauren had never seen, signed by a doctor she had never met. Even more insidious was a handwritten journal, presented as Lauren's own, filled with entries describing feelings of overwhelm and despair. The handwriting mimicked hers closely enough to fool a casual observer, but Lauren knew she had never written those words. The realization that Sylvia and Roger had orchestrated such a meticulous fabrication left her reeling, a mix of anger and disbelief coursing through her. The court hearing arrived swiftly, held in a sterile courtroom that felt suffocating under the weight of the Montgomerys' influence. Lauren, represented by a public defender overwhelmed by the case's complexity, struggled to counter the polished arguments of the opposing counsel. The judge, swayed by the seemingly airtight evidence and the Montgomerys' impeccable public image, issued a preliminary ruling that shattered Lauren's world. Temporary custody of Clara was granted to Sylvia and Roger. The decision was clinical, delivered without emotion, but its impact was devastating. That afternoon, Sylvia arrived at the house with a court officer. Lauren stood frozen as they took Clara, her daughter's soft weight lifted from her arms. Sylvia's expression was unreadable, a mask of false sympathy, while the officer avoided Lauren's gaze. The door closed and the house fell silent, the absence of Clara's presence like a physical wound. Alone in the empty apartment, Lauren sat on the edge of the couch, surrounded by the remnants of her life with Clara. Her blanket, a tiny onesie, a half-empty bottle. The silence was deafening, broken only by the echo of her own thoughts. A single conviction burned within her, sharp and unyielding. She would not forgive them for this. The Montgomerys had taken her daughter, but they had also awakened something in Lauren, a fierce determination to fight back, no matter the cost. Chapter 3. Letters of the Past. In the oppressive heat of a Phoenix summer in 2017, Lauren drove through the sprawling suburbs to a place she had visited only a handful of times, the old house where Eric had grown up. The modest, single-story home, now used as a storage space for the Montgomery family's business records, sat on a quiet street lined with sun-bleached lawns. Lauren's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with purpose. The loss of Clara had ignited a fire within her, and she was determined to uncover something, anything, that could challenge the Montgomerys' pristine reputation and bolster her fight to reclaim her daughter. She recalled a fleeting conversation with Eric years ago, before their marriage, when he mentioned his parents' dental empire weathering a significant tax audit in the 1990s. The Montgomerys had emerged unscathed, their wealth intact, but the memory of that ordeal lingered in Lauren's mind as a potential weak point. The house was unlocked, as Eric had once mentioned it often was, a careless habit of a family confident in their untouchability. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and old paper. Stacks of cardboard boxes lined the living room, their labels faded but meticulously organized, a testament to Sylvia's obsessive attention to detail. Lauren moved methodically, her nursing training lending her a calm precision, despite the anger simmering beneath her surface. She sifted through files filled with invoices, contracts, and patient records from the Montgomery dental clinics, most of it mundane and irrelevant. Hours passed, the sunlight filtering through the blinds shifting across the room, when she found a box tucked in a corner, its lid marked with bold red ink. "Do not discard." Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside was a collection of documents, brittle with age, their edges yellowed but intact. The folder contained a series of letters, contracts, and financial statements, all dated from 1994. As Lauren scanned the pages, a chilling picture emerged. The documents detailed a scheme orchestrated by Roger Montgomery, who had used shell companies to funnel insurance payouts after a fire at one of their clinics. The fire, described in a clipped insurance report, had been ruled accidental at the time, but handwritten notes and correspondence between Roger and an unnamed associate hinted at something far darker. The fire had been deliberately set to collect a substantial payout. A single line in a letter, written in Roger's precise hand, referenced cleaning up loose ends after the incident. Buried deeper in the folder was a newspaper clipping, its ink faded but legible, reporting the death of a clinic employee in the blaze, a maintenance worker named Thomas Reed, whose passing had been quietly attributed to an unfortunate accident. The Montgomerys' wealth and influence had ensured no further questions were asked. Lauren's hands trembled as she pieced together the implications. The signatures on the contracts, Roger's, Sylvia's, and those of intermediaries, were clear, binding them to the scheme. The documents were a damning thread, linking the Montgomerys to fraud, and, potentially, something far worse. She worked quickly, using her phone to photograph each page, ensuring she had digital copies of every incriminating detail. Her instinct was to march to the police, to expose the Montgomerys' past, and watch their empire crumble. But she paused, her mind sharpening with strategy. The police might take months to act, if they acted at all, given the family's influence. Instead, she gathered the originals and copies, carefully replacing the folder to avoid suspicion, and left the house as silently as she had entered. Her destination was not a police station, but the office of her attorney, a tenacious woman named Margaret Cole, who had taken Lauren's case despite the odds stacked against them. Lauren clutched the documents tightly as she drove, her resolve hardening with each mile. The letters of the past were more than relics. They were weapons, and she intended to wield them carefully. Chapter 4. First Blood. In the fall of 2017, the air in Phoenix carried a faint crispness, a rare reprieve from the relentless desert heat. But Lauren felt no relief as she entered the courthouse for another grueling custody hearing. The sterile courtroom, with its polished wood benches and flickering fluorescent lights, had become a battlefield where her future with Clara hung in the balance. Her attorney, Margaret Cole, a wiry woman with a sharp mind and an unyielding commitment to the case, had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Armed with the damning documents Lauren had uncovered in the Montgomery family's old house, Margaret was ready to shift the tide. Lauren sat beside her, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face a mask of quiet determination, despite the exhaustion that had settled into her bones. As the hearing began, Margaret rose to address the court, her voice steady and commanding. She presented a meticulously organized dossier, its contents drawn from the brittle papers Lauren had found. Copies of letters, contracts, and insurance reports from 1994, all pointing to a calculated scheme by Roger Montgomery to orchestrate a fire at one of their dental clinics for profit. The documents also hinted at the cover-up of a tragic death. An employee lost in the blaze, his passing buried under the weight of the Montgomerys' influence. Margaret argued that Sylvia and Roger had concealed this history when filing for custody of Clara, presenting themselves as upstanding citizens while hiding a past that called their integrity into question. The evidence was compelling, each page a thread unraveling the Montgomerys' carefully curated image. The opposing counsel, a polished attorney accustomed to winning, faltered as the weight of the revelations settled over the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the documents with a furrowed brow. The implications of the evidence were impossible to ignore. She issued an immediate suspension of the temporary custody order that had placed Clara in Sylvia and Roger's care, pending a thorough investigation into the new allegations. The ruling was a small victory, but to Lauren, it felt like the first crack in the Montgomerys' impenetrable facade. As the gavel fell, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of hope, though the absence of Clara still gnawed at her heart. Word of the scandal spread quickly beyond the courtroom. A local reporter, tipped off by an anonymous source, broke the story in a Phoenix newspaper, detailing the allegations of fraud and the long-buried tragedy tied to the Montgomery dental empire. The article gained traction, amplified by social media, and picked up by larger outlets. By the end of the week, the story had reached NBC Arizona, casting a harsh spotlight on Sylvia and Roger's once sterling reputation. Patients began canceling appointments at the Montgomery clinics, wary of entrusting their care to a family now tainted by accusations of deceit. The network of dental practices, a cornerstone of their wealth, began to crumble as whispers of the scandal spread through the city. Amid the growing chaos, a journalist from NBC Arizona contacted Margaret, requesting an interview with Lauren to share her side of the story. The call came late one evening, the reporter's voice eager and persistent, but Lauren declined without hesitation. She had no interest in public spectacle or airing her pain for the world to see. Her focus remained singular: the return of her daughter. Each day without Clara felt like a wound that refused to heal, and no amount of media attention could fill that void. As she sat in her quiet apartment, surrounded by the remnants of Clara's nursery, Lauren waited, her resolve unwavering. The documents had drawn first blood, but the fight for Clara was far from over. Chapter 5. Countdown. In the waning days of 2017, the Montgomery family's once impregnable empire showed visible cracks, and Lauren stood at the center of their unraveling. The Phoenix courthouse, now a familiar battleground, buzzed with tension as the final custody hearing loomed. The Montgomerys, sensing the tide turning against them, shifted tactics. Through their attorney, they extended an offer to Lauren: a substantial financial settlement, assurances of future support, and a proposal for shared custody of Clara. The terms were presented as a gesture of goodwill, a chance to avoid further conflict, but to Lauren, they reeked of desperation, a last-ditch effort to salvage their control. She rejected the offer without hesitation, her resolve hardened by months of betrayal and loss. Clara was not a bargaining chip, and no amount of money could erase the pain of her absence. Eric, her estranged husband, made a personal plea in the form of a letter, delivered to Lauren's apartment by courier. The letter, written in his meticulous handwriting, urged her to settle peacefully for Clara's sake, framing the conflict as a family misunderstanding that could still be resolved. The words stung, not for their sentiment, but for their detachment, as if Eric still believed he could bridge the chasm between his loyalty to his parents and his role as Clara's father. Lauren read the letter once, then set it aside, her heart unmoved. She had no intention of compromising with those who had tried to strip her of her daughter. The final court date arrived, a cold morning that felt heavy with anticipation. Lauren sat beside her attorney, Margaret Cole, in the same sterile courtroom where she had faced so many setbacks. The judge, having reviewed the evidence of the Montgomerys' past misdeeds, delivered her ruling with measured authority. Full custody of Clara was restored to Lauren, effective immediately. The decision was a triumph, the culmination of her relentless fight, but as Lauren listened, she felt no surge of joy. Eric, seated across the courtroom with his parents' legal team, avoided her gaze, his face a mask of resignation. The absence of his acknowledgement cut deeper than she expected, a final confirmation of his complicity in the ordeal. The next morning, as Lauren prepared to reunite with Clara, news broke that Roger Montgomery had been arrested. Federal agents, acting on a tip prompted by the court's investigation, charged him with insurance fraud related to the 1994 fire at the dental clinic. The arrest made headlines, further eroding the Montgomery name. Sylvia, unwilling to face the fallout, fled to Florida, leaving behind the crumbling remnants of their empire. By midday, Clara was back in Lauren's arms, her small body warm and familiar, her presence filling the apartment with a quiet that was both comforting and haunting. Lauren held her daughter tightly, memorizing the weight of her, but the victory felt hollow. In the days that followed, Lauren grappled with an unexpected emptiness. The fight had consumed her, and its resolution left her changed. The anger that had fueled her battle against the Montgomerys had also reshaped her, leaving scars she couldn't yet name. She had dismantled their world, exposing their lies, and reclaiming her daughter. But the cost was a lingering sense of loss, not just for the family she had once known, but for the part of herself that had been eroded by vengeance. As she sat in the stillness of her apartment, Clara asleep in her crib, Lauren realized that her triumph was not a celebration, but a reckoning, a quiet acknowledgement of all that had been broken. Chapter 6. The Mirror in the Nursery. 8 months after the tumultuous events of 2017, Lauren and her daughter, Clara, had left Phoenix behind, seeking a fresh start in the quieter, sun-drenched city of Tucson. The move was a deliberate act of reclamation, a way for Lauren to distance herself from the shadows of the Montgomery family and the pain they had inflicted. She rented a small, single-story house on a tree-lined street, its stucco walls and modest backyard offering a simplicity that felt like a balm after the chaos of the past year. Lauren secured a position as an emergency room nurse at a local clinic, her skills quickly earning her respect among colleagues. The work was demanding, but it grounded her, providing structure to her days and a sense of purpose beyond the courtroom battles that had consumed her. In the evenings, when Clara was asleep, Lauren retreated to the small living room, where she kept a leather-bound journal. The act of writing had become a ritual, a way to process the weight of her experiences. She filled the pages with reflections, her neat handwriting interspersed with mementos, faded clippings from old letters, photographs of Clara's first smiles, and simple crayon drawings her daughter had begun to create. Each entry was a testament to their new life, a fragile but deliberate attempt to weave together a narrative of healing. The journal was not just a record, but a sanctuary, a place where Lauren could anchor herself to the present while acknowledging the scars of the past. In Clara's nursery, a room painted in soft shades of lavender, Lauren had hung a large oval mirror framed in wood she had carved herself. The frame was imperfect, its edges uneven from her novice craftsmanship, but it was a labor of love, a symbol of her determination to build something of her own. The mirror reflected only Lauren and Clara, mother and daughter, unburdened by the intrusive hands of others. The absence of external influence, of control or deception, was palpable in the quiet room. Lauren often stood before the mirror, holding Clara, studying their reflections, as if to confirm that they were enough, that their bond was unbreakable. Occasionally, postcards arrived in the mailbox, their envelopes unmarked by a return address. The handwriting, though familiar, went unacknowledged. Lauren suspected they came from Sylvia, perhaps an attempt to reach out or to ease her own guilt, but she refused to open them. The cards represented a past she had no desire to revisit. One evening, in a moment of quiet defiance, she carried a postcard to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched the paper curl and blacken in the flames. The act was not one of anger, but of finality, a refusal to let the Montgomery's shadow linger in her new life. She felt no fear of the past. She had survived it, emerging stronger but irrevocably changed. Lauren's nights were calm but tinged with a lingering unease. She had reclaimed Clara and rebuilt a life for them, but forgiveness remained out of reach. The wounds inflicted by the Montgomerys, by their betrayal, their manipulation, were too deep to absolve. As she sat by Clara's crib, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall in sleep, Lauren understood that her journey was not about erasing the past, but about living beyond it. The mirror in the nursery reflected a truth she had fought for, a life free of lies, where she and Clara could define their future on their own terms.